Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. This is the show where between my guest interviews with subject matter experts and topic-specific deep dives, the aim is to arm you with actionable insights and information on how to prioritize your metabolic health and improve your overall health and well-being. Hey, what's up, everyone? So this discussion that I've had with Dr. Kiernan was so fantastic that time just absolutely flew by. The full episode itself is over 2 hours long, and this is not the Joe Rogan experience. So I've made the decision to cut it into two parts. This is part one of two. Part two of two will be released next week. We cover some really fantastic ground, some hard-hitting topics, and we get some great insights from Dr. Kiernan. So please enjoy part one, and we'll be releasing part two next week. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Animal-Based Dad podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Duplessis. My guest today is a man that I met through a mutual connection of ours, Shannon Davis, who I've come to befriend and look up to and lean on for advice over the course of 2025 in many different areas. And he's also a fellow podcast host, so it's quite nice to have him in the hot seat for a change. Dr. Kiernan, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks, Ricky, for the opportunity to be on the Animal-Based Dad. This is very, very different, for me. Again, being in the hot seat, as you said, really looking forward to sharing a different angle of knowledge, so to speak, rather than having a conversation and formulating questions. It's like I'll let you interrogate me, and I'll give you the best response that I possibly can. But yeah, it's thank you again. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be here.
You're most welcome. Thank you for being willing to participate. So, Urban, I wonder if you might do us the favor of just giving us a brief synopsis. Who are you? Where have you come from? How did you get involved in the space that you're in at the moment? Just build a background story for the listeners, please.
Gotcha. So you already mentioned I'm a podcast host, so that's something I do for fun. I'm the host of the Decoding Health podcast, which, by the way, you were a guest on. Very delightful conversation, around carnivore meat eating. Go figure. All in alignment with that. But in my day job, I'm an innovator. I own my own drug discovery and development company. I'm Metabolic Biopharma. And so we're, as a part of that venture, we're in the pursuit of developing both technologies and therapeutics for dealing with some of the most prevalent chronic diseases that are out there. The general buckets are metabolic, cardiovascular, and neurodegenerative. And the novel aspect regarding our therapeutic modes of action, they're all focused around lipid metabolism. Because that is an underlying common denominator between those three general groups, and as well as other indications that out there, and that it is an understudied and underutilized mechanism for drug treatment, but from a mechanistic standpoint, it makes the most sense. And why, when you come to individuals with metabolic deficiency, including obesity, these diseases tend to cluster in individuals, and so just a little bit, turning the clock back, a little bit further, like 25 years ago, the PhD in bioanalytical chemistry from Arizona State University. And, I've worked in industry my entire career. And as a course of that journey, I've been funded multiple times through the National Institutes of Health. And my first initial funding was, a huge win. It was a NIH phase 1 and phase 2 grant from the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, Kidney Disorders. That's a huge mouthful. Turn around and say to the NIDDK for the studying of biomarkers for pre and type 2 diabetes. And that was a very unique, exploration in which all of the biomarkers that we were keying on weren't your traditional, what you would associate with type 2 diabetes and diabetes. They actually all focused around lipid metabolism. And so that really started to change my thoughts on things regarding, how this area of metabolic sufficiency or deficiency actually starts to play out. And, over the course of my career, I've evolved. I'm no longer in the biomarker and diagnostic space. I'm obviously in the therapeutic, but long story short, as a part of that history, because I'm not integrated or a part of any camp.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way things sit right now is everything is very polarized.
Oh, yeah.
They're very tribal, and I'm not from any particular tribe. I'm just here, and I'm able to, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, I can't comment on that. I'm able to see the situation that we're dealing with when it comes to metabolic health, and there are these, the discussions around glucose, glycemia, as well as lipid metabolism leading into cardiovascular disease, and how those two camps are so very tribal. And I can sit from my third, I kind of feel like, I'm the dad sitting at the kitchen table talking to both children because they were fighting with each other and scolding them both and trying to, who's right and who's wrong here. And by my vantage point, like, I listen to the arguments around the sugar and the glucose side. And for the most part, I'm not going to argue with your arguments. And then I listen to the lipid metabolism side, and I'm not going to go and discredit the involvement that blood fats play in the contribution to disease. So both camps are right, but at the same token, both camps are wrong.
Yeah.
And this is where we're failing to see eye to eye. So it for me, just like from a geeky scientific perspective, I find it very, very interesting, the psychological, the social dynamic of all of this. I've seen people just getting very angry and freaking out when it's just like, yeah, you're 70 with this current statement or topic. I see you being 75% right. Okay. But that 25% that you're wrong on is highly significant. So maybe drop the ego a little bit and let's work towards solving the problem, and that's where I kind of sit in my life right now. Like, I'm also, a husband, a father, and so parenting, that's all problem solving. Maintenance of a good marriage, that's all problem solving. I'm also now a practitioner of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I recently got my black belt. And I remember my sensei, my professor, asking, like, having conversation in the class regarding what do we want out of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And there's some people, like, they want to be like a world champion. Other people just want to be a badass. Some people are doing this for self-defense. My response is I want to be the best problem solver I can be. Because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in my mind, is like the ultimate in terms of real-time problem solving, in which you're dealing with an equation that's constantly changing, and it's that type of struggle, that type of challenge outside of, like, the physical aspect, I find absolutely fascinating. It's just simply because it's not like, here's a math equation, turn around and solve it. No, this is a math equation that's fighting back against you.
Yeah, it's trying to kill you.
Yeah, it's a math equation that doesn't want to be solved.
Yeah, I like that. I like the thing I like about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've not practiced in a long time. I took a sabbatical when I needed to finish off my master's degree, and then COVID happened, and then we had our son, my wife and I. He's autistic, and he's quite hands-on. There's a lot of additional responsibility that goes with that. So I haven't yet got to the point where I have the free time to get back into it. But I hope to when he's a little bit older and a little bit more independent. But I remember fondly because I did mixed martial arts in my early 20s, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was the foundation of our grappling game. So it was part of what we practiced, although I didn't do it in the gi. It was all no gi at that point. But then in the UK, pre-2019, I got back into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and thoroughly enjoy it. It's a fantastic sport. And I like the analogy you give there because it's so true. It's when you're in that fight or flight state because of the physical stress that you're under, but you're still having to be able to think clearly, calm yourself to the point where you can problem solve and try to figure out what your opponent is doing, how to counter that, and how to apply your game to them. Like that's the highest level of problem solving I've ever experienced. I'm sure maybe there's some other versions of it, I don't know, but for me, of all the things I've been exposed to, that's pinnacle problem solving right there.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing I didn't want to throw this out there, just simply because like I have a son who's 8 years old. He does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and understanding like the demographics of his class, your son being autistic, if you find a really good kids program, it is that mind body connection that they develop as a part of that is absolutely phenomenal. Like one of my son's jujitsu classmates, he's autistic, and his ability now to regulate in real time situations, it's just like it's such a huge win. Like when he started off, like getting upset, pulling kids in hair and everything, to the point now where okay, he's upset and he sits there on the mat, and then he starts doing this with his hands to get himself to calm down and breathe.
Yeah, stillness.
Yeah, that self-regulation is going to help that young individual advance so much further in life than like anything from like from Tough Guy aspect or anything. And considering from an autistic standpoint, there's some data that's starting to come out regarding like a carnivore type diet, but from a child's perspective, extremely challenging to go and put them on. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit, from a societal perspective, even a little bit unfair, because they're going to grow up and they're going to see kids doing all this stuff and be like, well, why can't I do that? Why can't I fit in as a part of that? And those are very real world problem solving. Back to the general theme, like you have to kind of go through and get them to understand that there are risks associated. Like we got to keep you away from the red dyes. We got to keep you away from the sugar. And because the downside could be severe.
100%. And I mean, I can, well, I suppose it will just be blunt. I'm in the middle of what you've just described there. So my son is 4, and his sensory issues are a problem with eating. So textures and tastes and stuff like that. Very, very particular about what he will and what he won't eat. And you can't, it's a difficult one because I come from old school South Africa sort of upbringing, where discipline was extremely militant. Like there was the parents' way or the highway, and the highway was 6 of the best on your backside, and then you go and sit in the room and think about what you've done wrong, kind of thing. It was corporal punishment, and then quite stringent upbringing where if you didn't eat what was dished up for you, you didn't eat, and you were punished on top of that. Understanding what I do now about autism, about the way that impacts the brain and the development, and is, I mean, at 4 years old, he's not able to reason to begin with. No kid is.
Correct.
But he also has the disadvantage of his language is at the equivalent level of maybe a 2-year-old. So he's at an extreme deficit in terms of communication.
and he's not being naughty, right? His refusal to eat certain things is not him being naughty in the traditional sense. The sensory overload that he's rejecting is something completely outside of his control. And you've got to, it's an extremely difficult puzzle to solve, because I understand enough about nutrition that I can't be blasé about what he eats. And I'm very much of the same school of mind as Dr. Chris Palmer, whereby mitochondrial health underpins brain function, underpins mental health. And I think the link between mitochondrial health and mental challenges, I'll phrase it that way, because it can be anything from schizophrenia to depression to developmental challenges as well.
Sure.
And this is my opinion. It's not, I'm not stating medical fact yet, but my opinion is that there's a fundamental link there. And it makes sense to me from the perspective of, if you think of your mental health as a software, you cannot expect that software to run as efficiently as it should if the hardware you're trying to run it on is at a deficit to begin with. So if you're not getting that right nutrition, especially at an extremely young age where brain development is at its fastest, it's skyrocketing. All development is, of course, but brain development is at a pace which is almost unimaginable. If you're not getting the right nutrition into that child, you're putting them at a disadvantage developmentally. And for someone who's already developmentally challenged, that compounds. So I sit and I try to problem solve this. And I'm at the point now where I cook up a batch of meat. So, for example, tomorrow I will cook up, I've got a batch of lamb mince, high fat lamb mince. I'll add a bit of butter to that to get the fat ratio somewhere near 1:1, 1 gram fat, 1 gram protein. And I will set that aside. And he is still on baby sachets. It's the only thing he will eat without question. The little weaning sachet is made for like 7 to 10 month olds.
Really?
The nutritional profile of that stuff is absolutely atrocious.
Yeah.
And of course it is. It's not intended for a 4-year-old child. It's intended for a 7 to 10 month old who's still getting mother's milk, but is in the process of weaning off and moving on towards solids.
Sure.
So what I'm having to do, because he outright rejects homemade meals, I'm having to integrate it into the sachet in small amounts. And I've got it to the point now where I can get about 1 sachet in a bowl and then the equivalent amount of my homemade meat and mix it all real up good, like mix it good. Yeah. And sorry, I forgot to say that I blend the meat as well. So that it's a similar texture. And this week got him eating that. And knock on wood, like, what a difference it's made in his behavior. Like,
without a doubt.
It's insane. He was sick last weekend. He had a tummy bug of some sort, so he was throwing up and getting sick a lot, and as a result didn't eat much, didn't have much of an appetite. And when a kid's sick, you don't push them to have to eat anything because you're the one who has to clean it all up.
Right.
Yeah. So practically speaking, it's not possible. But his behavior tanked. Like the tantrums and the dysregulation of his emotion was through the roof. Yeah. It was the worst it's ever been in his life. And then to see the turnaround where the bug had gone and we managed to start getting some good nutrition in him. And it's not immediate either. It takes 24 to 48 hours before you start to see that turn. And the back end of this week has been the happiest, bubbliest, most lovable little boy again. It's been such a pleasure to be around him. So, yeah, that problem solving in the real world sense, where you're trying to figure out how to get the nutrition into the kid when the kid has sensory issues and doesn't want to eat the stuff. Like, it's work, man. It's work.
No, it is. But, as a loving parent, it's like, what are the alternatives?
Well, the alternatives are, and I'll be perfectly blunt, and I say this as a father of a child with special needs. if we were to just let him eat only what he eats, and then you come across some people that have this mindset like any calories is fine, like just anything.
Yeah.
Understanding what I do about nutrition, empty calories are going to cause a problem for him developmentally more than what he already has. It's going to stunt his development even further. And that's very unfair because it's not his decision. He doesn't have agency over this. The parents have agency. And it's difficult. Like there are nights where I sit with tears in my eyes because of the frustration and the worry, trying to do the best that we can for him.
Right.
It's difficult. I don't for a second pretend that it's easy and you just do what you got to do. But as a parent, you're the one who has agency over that, and your decisions directly impact the child's development.
Yeah.
And I want more parents to take responsibility over the agency that they hold.
And to be honest with you, I want the exact same thing. Just as an aside, my wife's in pediatric cardiology, and she
Nice.
sees situations all the time. And it's, the same old song and dance, diet and exercise, but you're just wasting your breath because the parents aren't going to go and do anything about it. And a 7-year-old is not going to go and start cooking their own meals. They don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Nor should they, in my
No,
personal.
100%. Yeah, no, it's not down to them. Yeah.
There's so much literature out there in terms of these neuro deficits being overcome by a ketogenic, carnivore, high protein, high fat type diet, in which like even things like epilepsy.
Yeah. Well, that was the original use case for the ketogenic diet.
Exactly. But nobody knows that anymore. It's just like you deal with the seizures when they happen, and here's your medication. You take it every single day, irrespective of the side effects, and hopefully you will have less seizure. Whereas if you instill the discipline and, to use your terms, take agency as the parent and give your child this diet and work with them and coach them and reinforce with them the need for this diet, they can have an absolutely normal life, drive a car, have a job, maintain relationships. It's, who wouldn't want that for their kid? In my personal opinion, but it's just, and you see so much, resistance regarding this. And it's hard for me to sit there, like, you're dealing with a very, specific, use case, and it's personal to you with the autism. And, as ages like 0 through 8, the whole name of the game is fat, because that's the point in time where it's just neurodevelopment. That's all they're doing. That's why these kids, in case any of your audience members don't, realize this, that's why kids are so head top heavy, because it's neuro development. Their brain grows to the size pretty much of where it's going to be. And then the rest of everything catches up in puberty. That's when the face develops to go and fit the brain casing. You need the building blocks in order to turn around and support that. And call me freaking crazy, I'm not aware of anywhere in which carbohydrate is a building block.
No.
It's the building block of nothing. And so you need to have this. People need to understand, and I'm not shaming people for not understanding, but this is 2025. If you've got like a cell phone with a data plan, you have the world's access to information at your fingertips. So maybe the next time you're taking a dump, rather than playing a video game, research some stuff on nutrition to maybe go and potentially benefit the life of your child and learn how to go from a dietary perspective, turn around and prioritize, this is what we need to focus on. And then these are the food choices. And then we can go and put like in these occasional fillers in between, because you still have to go and like live life, but you have to do that responsibly. But, it's back to that whole, adage, I'm not lecturing you as a parent, but like you have to do what you have to do before you can do what you want to do. That's like a recurring conversation that you always have with teenagers. You're not there yet.
No,
But it's
I've got a 10-year-old.
Oh, okay.
Some of the conversations already, don't worry.
But it's that matter of prioritization, that it's just like I need to do what I have to do, and then okay, I want to do this. We can do that in bite-sized pieces. As long as you have enough of a base. The human body is absolutely remarkable, and how it will heal itself in most cases. But especially these, let me take a step back with these chronic conditions. And I think this is where like part of this understanding your ethos and everything, we're getting to regarding like these metabolic related disorders and stuff. How quickly your body can recover if you just give it a chance to go and do this. Now, the autism and some of these neurodegenerative, they're way more complex, but nonetheless, if given the right building blocks, to your point, it's quite remarkable in terms of whatever that original cause was of that, deficiency. There's something there. So, it's not like I'm a firm believer, it's not like that they can't have a normal life. It's just they're going to have to work much harder to go and do that. But, God works in mysterious ways, and these are the cards that are dealt. And, my son goes to a school for the gifted. And as a part of that, like they have to test to get into that school. And so I'm very proud of him for testing well and getting into that school. But there's a lot of children who are there who are special needs.
Yeah.
And that should give you, because their brains just work in such unique ways. And stuff.
Yeah, they definitely do, because my son, as I said, he's got the language acumen of a 2-year-old, more or less, give or take. So he's starting to say words in context as part of communication. But it's a word here or there. He can't talk in sentences to you. He will point and go water, or he will point and want this, or point and want that. But he can recite his ABCs, A through to Z, forwards and backwards. And he can count 1 to 20, forwards and backwards. And he recognizes the letters and the numbers. So, yeah, they have almost superpowers that make it a little bit unfair compared to neurotypical people, because their recollection, in his case, recollection is off the charts, but it's his ability to communicate which needs to catch up. So I'm working very diligently to make sure that he has the right building blocks in place to help support his development from that regard. And he's going to school in September, and he will be getting, we've got him a really good placement at a local school, which I'm very thrilled about. And he will be getting the support he needs from teachers who are trained specifically to deal with his kind of condition, and to help kids with his condition to learn to communicate effectively, and so on and so forth. So I'm excited for that, but my job as the parent is to make sure that the fundamentals are in place such that his brain is enabled to develop and take on the information and to do all the things it should do. I couldn't in good conscience send him in there nutritionally deprived and go, oh, well, he won't eat. It's just one of those things. Like, it would be very convenient to say that. It would make my life a lot easier, because it's a right pain trying to get him to eat properly. But it's my responsibility as his dad to make sure that, especially given the the avenues that I've gone down with regard to nutrition and metabolic health and stuff, it would be remiss of me to not really put effort in there.
And I'm actually really excited for you. Just father to father, just make sure that your son gets exposed to as much stuff as possible, because you don't know what is going to be the thing that he latches onto.
Yeah.
And and it's very, very common for these gifted children in which there's going to be something or a handful of things where it's like, holy crap. Like they just immerse themselves into that, and they know that front, back, left, right, front, right. And then there's other things where it's just like, I really don't care about that. And then they don't participate in that. But just off the top of my head, I can think of one little boy where like you give him like any sets of like numbers, like addition, subtraction, multiplication. Kid's like 7 years old, and he'll do it like I have to break my calculator to figure out what that is, because you're multiplying 3 or 4 digit numbers to themselves, and he can just do it in his head just like that.
Yeah.
And then another little boy, the whole family speaks English, our whole ecosystem speaks English, but because of the tutor, he reads, writes, and speaks Spanish just from experience.
Yeah.
It's like his brain registers with Spanish better than it does with English. And so you don't know where that gift is going to lie. But that's the beautiful thing about that condition is their brain has rewired in such a unique way that there's a talent in there.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Out, and that by you doing your job in terms of helping overcome the deficiencies in this, being able to take that gift set and then being able to go and become in a position where you can apply that and be a gift to the rest of the world. And so I think that even though this is a lot of work and challenge and struggle, as a part of that, I think in the long run, with your efforts and in the right environment and ecosystem, this could be an absolute treasure. So
100%. Yeah. There's no question in my mind that he may be, and I say this very carefully. I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of engineers in my 9-to-5 day job, which is in mobile telecoms, and some of them have got the social skills of a brick, but are some of the most intelligent people you've ever met. And I think, like maybe he'll be a little bit socially awkward in certain instances. I know I am. But I think that he will, like you say, he will find the things that he's interested in and he'll latch onto them and he'll be something of a savant, like really, really into it and really good at it. And that's all I want for him. I just want him to thrive. But it's going to take a little bit of effort up front to enable that.
Absolutely. With the PhD in chemistry, it's like I've met many of those people where, you walk out of the room and it's like, wow, super smart guy, definitely autistic. They won't even look you in the eye, for in an individual. It's just that level of social awkwardness, but it's just they have a gift for that particular art that they immerse themselves into. So it's really incredible and stuff. So again, it's not necessarily the journey from a parenthood perspective that you were looking for, but nonetheless, like embrace it with both arms.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, life deals you the hand that you are given, and yours is just to do the best you can with that hand. It rains and shines on everyone, so you just got to do what you got to do.
But I'm going to give you a tremendous amount of credit, considering you recognize your role in all of this, and my brain just kind of like ran off. And, we were talking about how like kids aren't going to be able to cook for themselves and stuff. And understanding that, from like an oncology perspective, which is like the parents' like worst nightmare. You have a child with cancer. And there's so much literature out there even for pediatric oncology, in which if you put them onto a ketogenic diet, and it's actually recommendation for many cancer treatment centers, is that you put them on a full ketogenic diet, they will respond to treatment so much better.
Yeah, that's come a long way. I say that because I started my whole nutritional journey in early 2018, and I came across Professor Thomas Seyfried somewhere in late 2018, maybe even early 2019. And at the time, it was almost taboo. Like it was so controversial, the metabolic theory of cancer, that he was being basically lambasted left, right, and center in the sort of public domain, people calling him a quack and claiming he's crazy and this, that, and the next thing. And fast forward to 2025, and like you say, like there's large swathes of the almost mainstream medical infrastructure that have adopted this approach and gone, you know what, it's actually an ideal adjunct to traditional modes of treatment. Yeah. And we're seeing people respond better to the traditional treatments, whether it be radiation or chemo or whatever, if they're on the ketogenic diet to begin with. So that's been mind-blowing to watch that change.
And it's still not mainstream, but it is growing in acceptance. But the thing that like really blows my mind is when there's parents who are actually resistant to it. Like they don't want to do it. And I'm just like, this is like your worst nightmare, because nothing good comes out of pediatric cancer.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, like, and unless you're like somebody who's completely and totally morbid, and there's a special place in hell for you if you really are. There's nothing good that comes out of that situation.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you go full?
Yeah, you do whatever you can do, surely.
Yeah. And again, so I think we find it. We find ourselves in a very, very interesting time when it comes to like the whole concept of like, what does it mean from like a metabolic health standpoint? And I'm going to use cancer as the kind of like the poster child for all of this, and just simply because of the analytical technology, the PET scan specifically, that's used for diagnosing cancer. And it's a radio labeled glucose that's a positron emission, antimatter. It's really fascinating. So the moment that positron shoots off and comes in contact with matter, you get a little flash of light. And simply because the metabolic rate of cancer cells is so much higher than the surrounding tissue, those spots glow.
Yeah, light up.
And just by simple convention, it's like, if these things want glucose so bad, well, let's take glucose out of the equation, because it's pretty well established that you can live off of ketones.
Yeah.
And that's the premise behind what we were just talking about, is basically you're starving the cancer cells. We're not giving them the base nutrients that they need in order to survive, just using biological, trickery. But then you turn around and you flip, you take the PET scan and then you flip it around in the opposite direction. And now you've got the whole concept regarding type 3 diabetes, which it isn't a new. It's becoming more and more mainstream now, but I've talked about it on my podcast. When it goes from like the research world into the medical community, there's at least a decade, delay before that happens. And the first time I got exposed to type 3, the concept of type 3 diabetes, was in 2010. I remember being at the conference when it was brought forward, and it's just like, still there's some people who haven't heard of it, but it is growing in popularity. But the whole concept between type 3 diabetes is the simple fact that you're having parts of the brain where there is no glucose
Yeah.
uptake, and so basically, well, why is that glucose not going into those cells? Well, it's because they're insulin resistant, and there's there's so many evolving chains of thought that go on behind this, and I'm going to use Dr. Nellie Tanzi's words. She's an advisor she's from Indiana University, very well known in the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's space, and she's an advisor to my company INP. Her point is there's so many of these areas of medical silos in which you're not really going to see any profound change until there's a group of people that either retire or die.
Yeah.
And that's the hard truth as a part of the battle that you're trying to fight, and then I'm trying to fight in my own way, is to be able to go and overcome this status quo that is literally controlled, this narrative that is controlled by a handful of very, very powerful individuals within that particular industry, or in this case, medical silo. So it's very challenging and frustrating at the exact same point, because it doesn't matter how much data you have. It's like their voice is able to trump anything that you say. And the moment you start to question their legacy, like I've said it before on my show too, it's like if you want to be attacked by, like, not a grizzly bear, but like a Kodiak, or if anybody's ever experienced a Kodiak before, how big they are, and those are human killers. If you experience a Kodiak, go and challenge the legacy of one of these individuals, and they will summarily try to destroy your career.
It's insane, huh?
Yeah.
It takes a very special kind of scientist to be able to have the humility to step back and admit, oh, I was wrong, and then spend a bit of time correcting course. A good example of this would be Professor Tim Noakes, who, being South African, I'm obviously familiar with him. He was all about high carb for performance in athletes and sports and so on and so forth, until he ended up giving himself type 2 diabetes by following his own advice, and then having to sit back and go, something's not quite right here, and then spend some time in literature and go, maybe there's something to this high fat thing after all. And now he's one of the biggest advocates for a ketogenic diet in the world, like definitely one of the most well-renowned. But it takes a special kind of scientist to do that, because he basically had to destroy his entire legacy, as you were saying, and then rewrite it. And that's, there's something funny about the human ego, that it's uncommon that someone would be willing to do that for themselves.
And especially with any individual that ends up obtaining a higher level of education, in which there's a capital D involved in that title. It's being a PhD myself, it's, if you understand the different degrees, the PhD by nature is, because the whole point of the PhD is to be an autonomous thinker, and you develop. The whole point is you're ready to graduate when you can develop out your thesis, develop, execute, and you have all of the conclusions and all of the discussions all written up without help from anybody else. And that makes the PhD the most selfish degree by definition, because it teaches you to be autonomous.
Mm.
You know, you have to be. It's just like if I still need to be spoon-fed stuff as a PhD, then you're not a PhD.
Mm.
You know, and so for people in my world who have gone through that ability to have that humility, back to your point, is extremely rare, because that would make them have to admit that they were wrong.
Yes, and I don't like doing that.
Yeah, and you know, but you know, the argument that I post against that is this whole concept of, you know, the science is settled, which I think is one of the dumbest statements that's ever come. Yeah. You know, the moment I hear somebody that says the science is settled, it's immediately, I'm putting you on mute, because there's nothing else that you're going to say that I'm going to take with any, that I'm going to give any credibility to.
Yeah.
Just simply because that's such an ignorant statement and concept. We're always constant. And it's not to sit there and say that the science is wrong. Like, back to, you know, when we open up this conversation, because I'm not a member of any camp. I can sit there and have the luxury of observing like both sides, like neutrality. I'm not sitting there saying that anybody is like 100% wrong. And I'm not even sitting there necessarily saying that you are wrong. I can come back and sit there and say that, well, you're not right.
Yeah.
Either.
And there's a difference.
There's a huge difference. You're right and you're wrong at the exact same time. You know, and you know, that's a, you know, to make this like a Joe Rogan podcast, maybe if we were smoking a little bit of herb right now, seconds, you know, but nonetheless, it's that type of, like, you know, thought and approach, again, from a problem solving standpoint, because when the moment you become tribal, you know, it's really hard to turn around and create solutions, just simply because you put blinders on your thought process.
Yeah.
And again, too, like, you know, you're carnivore. There are people out there who are vegan. You know, I'm not going to take the stance that, you know, all vegetables or fruits are necessarily bad. Okay. But at the same token, too, I'm not going to sit there and say that all that red meat's not going to kill you. Yeah. You know, yeah, I'm not going to sit there and, like, you know, whatever your beliefs are that, like, lead somebody to choosing a vegan lifestyle, you know, that's your personal choice. I'm not going to go and argue. You know, I'm a firm believer in freedom, and, you know, decide for yourself. But, you know, you can't take the stance that eating meat products is bad and is going to kill you. You know, but at the same token, too, like, you know, if you sat down and, you know, had a salad, you know,
you might choke a little bit.
Yeah, you might choke a little bit, you know, but nonetheless, it's, you know, I'm high protein ketogenic, but, you know, the same token too, I almost, like, without the concept of eating decaying stuff, I kind of view us as a little bit more like bears, in the sense that they will forage a little bit, and, like, you know, they'll eat some berries, you know, and stuff, and, you know, maybe, you know, they'll eat like some tree bark, you know, just to get some fiber into their system, but, you know, they're still mostly meat. So I think that there is some truth regarding, you know, having some of this stuff occasionally, you know, like, don't be like, you know, I eat berries and that's all I eat. That's absent, you know, in itself. But, you know, there's this level of potential flexibility, you know.
Yeah, we undeniably have the digestive flexibility to be able to lean into the plants and fungi kingdoms to support us. And then from an evolutionary biology perspective, that function was important for survival because those were literally our survival foods. If the hunt was unsuccessful, we could fall back on the plants.
Right.
And hunting being what it is, was not always successful. It wasn't always guaranteed. It must have been bloody hard work to take down a mastodon, for example. And you weren't always going to have that. And then when you come to the end of the upper Pleistocene and you start to experience the extinction of the megafauna, and suddenly you're faced with this trade-off where your game is getting smaller and smaller, but more difficult to catch and kill, but yielding a lower and lower nutritional return for the amount of effort that you're putting in. What's the logical conclusion? Well, agriculture, of course. And so you domesticate plants and animals. And of course, animals are a little bit more difficult, shall we say, to look after than what plants are. And so it makes sense that we pushed into the domestication of plants, and that over the course of a few thousand years, roughly 10 to 12, has become the predominant focus of our dietary patterns. Yeah. So yeah, we have that metabolic flexibility for sure.
And you're kind of touching on some stuff that I find very academically interesting, because again, embracing that whole concept that the science is never settled, and just we had a lot of ancient human artifacts. I'm going to sit there and say where the narrative really just the going theory just really it leaves more questions than answers. And I don't want to go down the whole road talking about the pyramids, and the some of the architecture in the Indus Valley in India, and the way that those were generated. And it's just even modern engineers are we have no idea.
Yeah.
How?
What's his name? Hancock stuff is fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating, but it all stems back down to with the timelines that are developing with the Göbekli Tepe and stuff, where it actually coincides with this the end of the last ice age, when there was still that large megafauna, and humans were very different then than what they are now. And Dr. Thad Conley was on. He was actually on twice on the Decoding Health. He's the first Dr. Q.
Yeah, I've watched it.
Yeah. And because he's an oral maxillofacial surgeon, and we were talking about how wisdom teeth. Do you still have wisdom teeth, or did you have them pulled?
I still have my wisdom teeth, but when I was younger, I had to have some of my back molars taken out to make space, because I had crowding and I had to have braces and stuff like that. And so my wisdom teeth have been able to come out where those molars had been removed. So had I not had those molars removed, I would have had problems with my wisdom teeth now, for sure.
But at one point in time, it's if you went back 12,000 years ago, did they have wisdom tooth extraction? No. And you go and you look at the archaeological evidence, these humans, they have their wisdom teeth. Their teeth are all perfectly straight. What does that mean? Their jaws were bigger than what they are now. Their skulls were bigger. By convention, their brains were bigger. And actually, Anthony Chaffee, this wasn't when he was on the show. It wasn't captured in the episode, but we were talking about it afterwards. It was there. It's in the historical record regarding this movement from this hunter-gatherer of these, just almost pure type diets, in which when they moved to this domesticated agrarian type culture, humans got smaller, and brains and brain size
shrank.
Some, and I just mentioned some of these structures in India, and from the archaeological evidence, from what I was reading, in the Indus Valley, they were actually some of the tallest, and you wouldn't get that from today's people that live in India, but they were some of the tallest individuals from the archaeological record. If you go that far back in time, like they were like 6 feet tall, and their brains were a third larger than what they are now. And so like there's this whole concept of our archaeological history, which leads into human evolution and development, which leads into this whole metabolic, all of these concepts around metabolism and development predicated upon what we're eating. All of this stuff is, to be honest with you, it should be in question more.
Yeah.
Because the narrative, the pieces just really just, they don't fit, and I'm going to state this because you live in the UK, and if you went and you turned the clock back to like, the Middle Ages and stuff, what would peasants eat versus the noble and royalty?
Oh, the peasants were eating grain. Sure.
They're eating grain,
Yeah.
and the nobility would be eating meat, cheese, and some, so basically the nobility were able to go and to at least some degree live up to the nutritional aspects that the biology had evolved to. And then the lessers were like, we'll let you just kind of like forage on your own. But a part of that is it keeps you weak and stupid.
Yeah, and compliant.
Because you're always going to be perpetually hungry. So
I think the Romans are the perfect example of that, aren't they? Like games and bread. The perfect way to settle the masses when they wanted to revolt.
Yeah, that's widely known. You appease the masses by satisfying these basic needs, and I'll be graphic and I'll throw in a few orgies, and everybody's happy.
Yeah.
All over. Yeah. And we're kind of digressing a little bit from like, the whole, I think the premise of your show and both our levels of expertise, but it's when it comes to nutrition, there's so many facets of life that are driven and controlled by that. Maybe this is in alignment with what what we're talking about. Just simply because I'm not aware of any aspect of life that doesn't involve your nutritional health.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Yeah, well, I've distilled it down to 5 basic lifestyle factors, which I call my 5 pillars of metabolic health, and they are nutrition, movement, sleep, light exposure, and grounding. And the reason I came upon those was because you were talking about tribes earlier. When in 2018, when I first started what I'll call my health journey and found my fascination with metabolic health, although at the time it was more specifically nutrition, I very quickly fell into the camp of nutrition is everything. And then became very tribal in that respect, and then very vocal online. But then I was faced with the fact that there were people who were doing non-nutritional interventions who were experiencing very, very similar lifestyle change results and improvements in health. For example, someone could be taking on exercise who had never really exercised before and would see phenomenal improvements in their health without changing the way they were eating. They were still eating crap, but they were getting some good movement in and seeing improvement. Other people would be taking sleep a bit more seriously and seeing tremendous improvement in that. And one of your episodes, Dr. Connolly, was extremely fascinating for me as well, because it helped put in place a few of the puzzle pieces regarding the importance of sleep that has led to me really trying to pay attention to that, as difficult as what it is for trying to juggle as much as I'm trying to juggle at the moment. But suffice to say, there's these different aspects, lifestyle factors, I'll be more specific, that yield significant health improvement in people who undertake a lifestyle change aimed at one of those lifestyle factors. And what that led me to understand is that it all boils down to metabolic health, which is to say the health of your individual cells and their individual function. And if your metabolic health is looked after, then everything built upon it. So if we're talking about the health of an individual cell, then if that is good, then the health of the tissue that that cell is part of is good, and then the health of the organ or the system. And so you go up and you build the whole of you. So metabolic health for me is the most foundational. You could go further into detail, and you could go to the level of the mitochondria, which are the little organelles within the individual cells themselves. But I think for the purpose of the general public, the layman, cellular level is probably as detailed as we need to get. So if you're looking after your health at the level of the individual cell, then by default, everything else will be better off than it otherwise could have been. And what I came to understand was that metabolic health is influenced by several different lifestyle factors. And for me, my bias being evolutionary biology and trying to understand what's been with us for the longest, I came down to, right, well, there's species appropriate nutrition, which for me is animal-based, Dad. Like, take two guesses what I'm going to advocate for.
Sure, absolutely.
But it's because if you look at human essential nutrients, so the nutrients that we must get from our diet because our bodies cannot produce them either at all, or at least not in the quantities that we require. And if we don't have them, we develop deficiencies and disease. So if we look at our essential nutrients, then without fail, animal sources tend to be the most nutrient dense and simultaneously the most bioavailable to our digestive system. And for me, that simple Simon says, that must be what we're designed to eat.
Okay, so that's where we're going to leave it off for part one. Thank you for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed the discussion so far. I appreciate that it was a bit of a weird place to cut it off. Again, Dr. Kiernan and myself, we're not planning on doing a two-part sort of series. We just had a really good conversation, and it went on for absolute ages. So this, I thought, was a good place to cut it off for part one. Part two will come next week. Thank you for watching. Look forward to having you back.